Hey folks, welcome back to Elm Town. I'm your host, Jared Smith. We'll be visiting with Théophile Kalumbu today. But first, let's talk about our sponsor. Logistically is the company where I work. At Logistically, we make transportation management software for third-party logistics companies and shippers. I'm grateful that Logistically pays me to spend a bit of my time recording Elm Town episodes, as well as pays for our recurring production and hosting costs. We build the front end for all new features in Elm. We have over 100,000 lines of Elm code in production. We're always eager to talk to folks who enjoy writing Elm. Please drop us a line, elmtown@logisticallyinc.com. I'll put a link in the show notes. Now, Théophile Kalumbu. Théophile has a few Elm contributions I'd like to mention. Elm UI Explorer, which is a tool to showcase a design system in Elm. He gave a talk about it at Elm Europe 2019 called Building a Design System with Elm. And then recently, he talked about Elm on the French podcast, If This, Then Dev. Théophile, welcome downtown.
Thank you, Jared. Hello.
Hello.
Very happy to be here.
Good. I wanted to ask you, did I pronounce your last name correctly? Kalumbu?
You pronounce it correctly. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Great.
Good. I always am afraid I'm going to make a mistake there. Is that Zambian, you said?
Yes, actually, it has origin from Zambia. My father is from Zambia, and I've been raised in France, and I live here in Paris.
All right. And so, did you grow up in Paris?
Actually, I grew up in Eastern France, in a city called Belfort. So it's near the German and the Swiss border. And I came to Paris when I was 20 to pursue my career as a programmer because I joined a school called Gobelin here in Paris, where I started working more and more on the web, and I found my passion, I say.
Okay, excellent. And so you found your passion, but tell me a little bit, let's go back and tell me kind of your start of how did you become interested? How did you find out that it was your passion? Was this, when you came to Paris, or did you realize this at some point earlier than that and then go to Paris to pursue that?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I really appreciate playing video games. So it was, in the 90s, and I was a fan of a Nintendo World. So I've played Mario and then Zelda and all those great games. And on the other hand, I really enjoyed drawing when I was a kid. And I always wanted to create things digitally, but I could not name them. And when I grew, I had many, let's say, computers, and then I started hacking a bit and drawing and discovered Photoshop. And fortunately, in the region where I grew up, in Belfort, there is a university specialized on communication and IT. So I applied, and I was able to be able to learn multimedia there, and this is where I found my passion.
Okay. Wow, that's really neat. Yeah, it seems like a lot of us are interested in games and then, find our way to programming through games. Did you write any games through that passion?
I wrote games during when I was learning Flash previously. It was Adobe Flash. Macromedia was something very powerful at that time. But no, apart hacking with a tool called the RPG Maker. I don't know if you know RPG Maker. There was this application. We were able to create your own role game. You can create your own Zelda, something like that. And I, with my friends, we are creating the sprites and doing a bit some codes to make it work. And it started like that a bit. This a curiosity for coding. But apart from that, I haven't been able to code a serious game, let's say, in my career. And I'm sorry.
Oh no, that I don't know that a serious game is much
Mm,
fun anyway, right? The best games are the ones that are made just because you're having fun. I think so.
mm.
Yeah, that's great. And so, you developed this passion, and you came to Paris at age 20, correct? Then, at what point did you discover Elm? How did that come into your view?
It actually it came, I would say, late during my career because like many people, I started coding in JavaScript mainly, and PHP had let's say a big impact here in France, especially thanks to frameworks like Symfony. So I've always worked at the beginning in startups or communication companies where we had to build websites and engaging experience with Flash again. So it was more, let's say, object-oriented programming that I was using at the beginning of my career. And I discovered M later. It was in 2017, even 16 before, when I was the lead developer of a company called Wika. And this company was specialized on car rental. And I met that guy called Guillaume Claret, one a friend of mine, who was really into functional programming. And at the same time, React was popping everywhere, and Redux was the way to go. And I accidentally or randomly found Elm by talking to my friends and looking for a solution that will allow to build UI in a reliable way.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds familiar to me as well. Coming from a JavaScript front end background, and then looking to find a way to build a reliable front end. What was the moment when you had discovered Elm that it became the solution to the problem of that reliability, and whatever other struggles you faced?
Yeah, it started at home and not at work because it's something I just noticed with this Elm ecosystem. It's very hard to ask or to be able to persuade teammates to go for Elm because we are used to do things in the mainstream way. So at home, I started hacking with Elm and I was doing side projects. And the one thing that really surprised me with Elm is that when I was building programs, it didn't crash because I had this continuous discussion with the compiler. And I was able to just write codes. It was very late. I remember, I think my first daughter was 1 year old or two. But at that time, children don't sleep very, let's say, early or wake up. So I was awake very late, and when she was sleeping, I started just hacking some Elm, and I found it very wonderful, to be honest.
Ah, yeah, that's great. And so, did you have experience with functional programming at this point before you or when you were getting started with Elm?
Never before. The only, let's say, a view of functional programming I had was through React, because at that time we were building enterprise application with React, and React borrowed many concepts from functional programming, such as functional components. And when you use tools like Redux, we have these reducers that are pure functions, and many concepts, immutability also. So this is how I entered the functional programming let's say world was through React actually, and each time we were following strictly those rules, not mutating variables or stuff like that. I saw that we had less much bugs than we used to have. So I was like, this is interesting. I think there is something to do there. So this is how I entered the functional programming world. And then I entered, let's say, officially into functional programming through Elm, where I learned all those concepts much better.
Sure. Yeah, I think it definitely lends itself to being a guide into that world without as many roadblocks as you might find with other forays into functional programming. I had a problem with reliability as well, and so I was trying to find solutions. And so I started, with some JavaScript libraries. I was playing around with things like Lodash. They had an FP plugin or subset of functions that worked in that way. And I was looking at some other languages, and some things would be pretty confusing. But then when I found Elm, it really kind of clicked. Like, oh, okay, these are the actual things that I'm looking for with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not functional programming itself. It's the things that functional programming gives me. So, yeah, I understand that. What is it about Elm that you like that's not available with other languages and ecosystems?
I will say having at the same time a language and an architecture, which is the Elm architecture, and being able to spin up a server in one command line. So it's the combination of all that Elm stand is really something apart from the others, in my opinion. And I will say also the great work that is done on the documentation, and enforcing all those rules when you create a library or even in your own codes to document and yeah, this make developing a front end fun.
Yeah, so you're talking about the documentation that is actually required when publishing a package in the Elm ecosystem. Like any publicly available function must be documented, and it must have some docs relationship with the entire page so that it knows where to put it. And that I think was a great thing to have from the beginning, right? Because you don't run upon packages that simply have no documentation. It makes you think about that as part of the. It's not as part of the process. It's not a thing that you will maybe add later if you've had time, right? Because those things they don't happen.
Later is never.
Right. Well, speaking of publishing Elm packages, you published Clue or Clue Theo Elm UI Explorer. And and do you want to tell us a little bit about the history of how that came about?
Yeah, sure. So it started because when I was working at Wika, we started using Storybook, and I don't know for which reason we had our own Storybook, own version. Maybe Storybook was not mature enough, and we started using that because it saved us a lot of time on two sides. First, when we were interacting with UX UI designers, we were able to communicate easier with them and not to have to build all the application and to start from scratch and just to isolate, let's say, some components in isolation. And on the other hand, it helps a lot developers not to reinvent the wheel and to have more a mindset of reusing and having, let's say, a cohesion on the UI. And at that time, it was really important because Wicar is a, let's say, client-facing application where the UI, UX, and the ergonomy is very important. So we had to be very, very to pay attention on all the detail, and a storybook is a nice answer for that.
Right, right. So you had this experience using it in the React ecosystem, and
Exactly.
then at what point did you decide, okay, I'm going to build this for Elm?
Yeah, so and then Storybook started to work well, and then I was very active in the Elm community in France, here in Paris. We had a lot of small events where we could go and then share, do some presentation. And I did a presentation where I kindly hacked Storybook. I was running Storybook, which is in React, and I initiated some Elm, small Elm app as components, which started being alive. And one person in the audience say, "Hey, this is very nice, but why don't you do it in Elm?" And I was really beginner at that time, and I was like, "Whoa, it's gonna be hard." And then he said, "Oh, I can even help you to do it because there are a lot of help in this small community during the meetups." And I think 2 or 3 months later, I was starting to try to make a storybook with Elm, yeah, like equivalent of storybook, and this is how it started.
Oh, that's great. I love that, the community is so encouraging to other people. Hey, why don't you try this? Who was it in the community, if you don't mind sharing, that encouraged you? Do you
Oh,
remember?
I don't remember his name. I'm really sorry. It was someone in the audience, but I will appreciate it to see him again if he remembers.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
If you're listening out there, why don't you, call in, send us a message on
yeah.
Twitter, or, respond. I'll have my email in the show notes, and Théophile, if you want to put your contact information in there, we can hopefully find out who that was.
Yeah, for sure. And it really, really motivated me. And like I told you, when you start building with Elm, even if it's late at home or during some breaks, you know that it compiles. And at some points, you have a safe state of your application and you can iterate very fast. And I started like that, and I managed to create something.
So when you say you can iterate fast in Elm, what is that process like for you?
I will say not to be afraid to start small. So I will start with a small program without ports, and I will just think about the modelization, how I want the page to be structured. And then after, I can add ports, for example, or other more complex. And I do that progressively without the fear of breaking everything. And that's what I appreciate with Elm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining it. Don't be afraid to start small. That's a great one. And for me, I think that I noticed folks, and I did this too, when I started, I was trying to avoid compiler errors at all costs. I would try not to even let them happen. I would be thinking in my head before I saved this file or ran the compiler, what do I really need to do? And then at some point, I learned to embrace that process, where now, instead of trying to avoid those compiler errors, I want to make them happen. I actively seek to make a compiler error happen first. That's usually my first goal. Where can I break the compiler in the most beautiful way? Or not break the compiler, but where can I break my program in the most beautiful way, so that this compiler that is actually my friend will help me along and guide me to the best solution to this problem. And I found that, if I can find that spot, and there are several of them, there's not just one spot, but if I go about that in the right way, then, I can, again, start small, start with a little break, a little thing that I want to change, whether it be in the view or the model or the update, wherever that part is, or as Dylan Kearns might say, you put in what you wish to happen, what you want to be reality. And then, and then a very small slice, and then you do that, and then let the compiler guide you around so that you can make that a reality. I found that to be so nice. I don't feel like I'm out in the ocean on my own. I'm on dry land, and I have, plenty of safety around me.
Definitely.
Okay, so you had this idea to build this, right, based on this meetup and these events. You started building it a couple months later. At what point did you have something that was usable?
I started noticing that when I had folks asking for some merge requests. I was like, whoa, so it's used. So for my personal, let's say, personally, I found it very useful because there were no concurrents, let's say. And I will say not many folks was interested on these parts at the beginning. And so I started having many people asking for some new features. I added some responsive, I added some dark modes, and it started being more and more complex. Unfortunately, I had less and less time, but at some point, it became the best answer I could have to know if it was usable. It was from the community and from the users, and I saw many nice feedbacks about the projects.
Yeah, so this was after you had published the package that you started getting these pull requests?
Actually, I published the package, and I also write some articles about it, and I also shared on Twitter, and I had the chance to be retweeted by famous people in the Elm community, such as Richard Feldman, and then it creates some traction, let's say.
Right.
I saw many message, and I'm happy because today it's true that the project is not maintained anymore because of a lack of time, but I saw many nice initiative, even some people building from what I did or going on other direction, and I think I am happy because it created I think a nice dynamic. So I'm very happy for that.
Yeah, I think it was the first example of a storybook-esque tool in the Elm ecosystem that I was familiar with, or that I discovered, and that for me kind of opened up that world because I had not seen that kind of a tool before. And what it did for me was motivated me to build, not directly using the tool, but to build a similar UI explorer in our ecosystem at work, logistically. So that was really nice. And that started in 2019, probably after you had already given the talk at Elm Europe, when it had become, made its rounds. And I had discovered it and thought, oh, wow, that's really neat. I want something like that. And so I introduced that. And now I feel like I'm starting to see the fruits of that labor come to fruition because at Logistically for a long time, I was the primary one writing Elm, and not a lot of other folks were. And so it was mostly just, for my own benefit and kind of hoping, hey, one of these days other people are going to really use this. But just in the past few months, we've been hiring more folks, and they may be new to Elm, or at least, new to the code base and to to what tools they should use to build things. And so I found that to be really helpful. That plus we use Elm Preview. And so
Mm.
the combination of those, and I kind of link between them, both documentation and the UI Explorer, so that you can kind of, traverse those different parts and explore. And so thank you for, bringing that into
Yeah,
my world.
you're welcome. You're welcome. And just to add another point, I also started to realize it was worth it because at my own work, I suggested to use it because we're using Elm, and there were no alternative at that time. And uh, some people tried, and we used it in production for many applications that we use. So it's also a good achievement, I would say.
Yeah, that's a testament to it for sure. So you use that today at VP, right? Is where you work. I don't know if we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, yeah. So I work at VP as a lead developer. And when I joined the company, there was a lot of folks doing functional programming, some Haskellers, some people using Elm. And I was able to create application around those stack. Today it's a bit different. The company is changing a bit, and there is less, let's say, room for exotic programming language, I would say. Uh, but still, some reliable application have been done with Elm that have worked very well, and I was able to use Elm UI Explorer, for example.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. So uh, I have a couple questions here. The first one being, what was it like getting Elm to production at VP? This is
Uh,
one of those questions that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've got from Guillaume Claret,
Ah,
your friend. So
cool.
I thank him for this.
Hello, Guillaume. First of all, thanks for the question. Um, I think it was, like I say, there was a good dynamic around that because many people were on the functional programming paradigm already using it. And even on the, let's say, engineering managers or other, let's say, people in the company were supporting this way of building software. So it was easier to adopt it. And second part is that the department where I work, we are creating application that are back office application. So we don't have constraints of SEO. We have more constraints of reliability. We want application not to crash. We want application that allow people to be productive. So by using Elm, we were able to build this kind of application. And even with developers that were learning the language, uh, and this was, I think, something that make it work. But for sure, like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, that it's hard to convince the others. So we had to convince people. And I was part of an evangelist of Elm when I arrived in the company. So I was conducting some workshop that we were doing during lunchtime. So at the beginning, we were only two, and then three, and then four, and then I started seeing people from the business, and it was very, 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 very cool.
So with your position at VP, do you get to make decisions about what tools you use, at least in your part of the company?
So as a lead developer, I'm able, of course, to have some final words about which language we can use, but it has to be validated by architects. We have architects in the company, and also there is, let's say, you need to be cohesive. It's not like anybody can choose his own language. So at that time, it was the direction that we had. in our information system. Today it's a bit different, but it's not like choosing the language just to play or to hack. It had some benefits, like I said, having reliable application that don't crash, because we are building application for people who are working in the warehouse, for example, who are need to produce content for sales that we are opening in the websites. So this was one, let's say, reason. Another reason is that for example, in my team, we have full stack developers, which means that they know, let's say, the back end, the front end, but they're not specialists on the front end, for example. So for this kind of profile, Elm is very interesting because it reduces risk of building bad software. Doesn't mean that we can build bad software with Elm for sure, but this rigid or strict way of doing, following the Elm architecture, following some documentation that are done, will make all the application look the same and behave properly.
Yeah, that's nice. And I think for me, when I've brought people on who had less experience with Elm, that sometimes they may still make mistakes. Like you said, it's not impossible to write write code that is imperfect, right? I mean, none of it's perfect, and more importantly, your requirements can change, and so when those requirements change, or you find code that is not to what you expect it to be, the refactoring process is so nice that I feel like you have more freedom in how you bring people in with less experience, because you can fix things, right? And when things need to change, you can make sure that they change in a way that doesn't break the
Yeah,
program.
exactly. Or even for refactoring, uh, we can do a first version that is very optimist, and then we can refactor more easily.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And so you mentioned this warehouse management system and the need for reliability there. I feel like sometimes the amount of reliability with Elm can be a double edged sword, simply for the fact that if your requirements aren't changing, you aren't adding new features. Sometimes the program can sit there working without problems, and people forget that it was such an efficient way to do it. They feel like um, maybe there's a problem, but the problem is that there isn't a problem, if that makes sense, right? Because you aren't messing with it all the time. You kind of lose it from your current site. So, do you have any thoughts about with your system there, about how you add Elm things and how that has affected uh, Elm as a tool at the company?
Um, yeah, if I understood well the question, we when we start creating Elm applications, there is this sensation that it can break, right? But then comes the time where we have to add new features, or we have to maintain the application. And there are some parts that shines on Elm, and some parts which are less, um, let's say efficient. I will take some example. For example, we add in one application to create an API, and we're using GraphQL as a backend for frontend. And I remember at that time we had example with React. So we had this stuff called Apollo, and then you had Apollo clients, and then Apollo server, and So there was kind of some magic there. And I remember we had to do the same in Elm, and of course we started working with some decoders, and then we started creating a lot of boilerplates, which is, let's say, one part I think that Elm can be painful to work with on that part, but at the same time, it's what makes it all clear because you know what you are doing. So what we ended up with, it was using a library called Elm, if I remember well, by Dylan Kearns, and it allows us to just generate from the specification all these boilerplates. So it was, let's say, an example of where Elm, the limit of Elm, but where it can shine also, because by generating all this code, because we had the types on the other hand with GraphQL, uh, Elm played well with GraphQL. So this is one example of, like you say, double-edged swords. Okay, everything is pure, everything is functional, but at the same time, you have to write all the update decoders function and no magic.
Right, right, yeah. Elm GraphQL by Dylan Kearns is really powerful, and I think that's a good distinction there between some tools in other languages seem magical, but with Elm, it's not magic. There's maybe some code generation going on behind the scenes with some tools, but it is clear, it's explicit, and that's really powerful. So yeah, we don't use GraphQL at our work, but we do use some tools to generate code. So we generate Elm from Python, and so through that process, we've been able to gain a lot of power and actually make our reliability on the back end more clear by generating Elm, which is more strict and will catch things that we may not catch on the back end. So I found that to be pretty nice to have, and of course make us more efficient. But yeah, the real point that I was trying to make with the Elm's reliability is that because it's reliable, assuming that you don't have to add many new features, the reliability sort of tends to make you forget, or when I say you, I mean make people who are maybe in charge of deciding what tools you use forget that Elm was used to build this, and that because of its reliability, you don't touch it, and so you don't think about oh well, they're working in Elm, because you don't have to go in there and fix a bunch of bugs, right? So you're not constantly reminded by it. So in that way, I think the reliability makes people just forget how important Elm is.
I get the point. Yeah. One example is that for some application, for our application, we can use, or we are suggested to use Sentry to be able to catch errors that can we have in production on the front end. But for Elm, we never had to use Sentry, for example. So once if we build the application in another more JavaScript language framework, we may need this kind of tool for it. This is just an example. So yeah, in fact, we kind of forget that it's living, it's there, and yes, and when you remove it, you will have other problems. But it's a matter of trade-off. I'm not saying that Elm is perfect, because sometimes we also ask me, oh, do you think everybody needs to do some Elm? It's a matter of trade-off. And what is your team? Are they junior, full stack, specialized? And your project, what are the characteristics of your projects? Do you have to ship very fast? You need to have something that is very reliable, like you say. So, and then you can choose.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And so I guess to that, how has Elm changed how you write software in general? So even outside of writing Elm code, is there some way that it has changed it? This is sort of another adaptation of a Guillaume Claret question.
Yeah, it definitely changed. For my part, I have been, I started programming with frontend, so with Slash, for example. At that time, it was ActionScript. It was classes and abstractions everywhere, and we're doing that to create user interface. So we had this button that extended a base button class, and then we had this, let's say, interface that we can implement, and all these abstraction we're using just to create UI. And what I saw when I started doing more Elm, and even in React or other, let's say, front-end frameworks that embraces functional programming, you can describe a user interface only with function. Here you see that you don't need all those abstractions. You can need some of them, of course, but with functions you can do everything, and you can create very complex application just with function and values without objects and inheritance and all this stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny how I think people tend to naturally move toward complexity. So it takes discipline to keep things simple. But I think I agree that when you do that, even in a language that doesn't enforce the same discipline that Elm does, you can gain benefits. So again, for example, with my work, we write Python in the back end, and I find myself writing a lot of functions. They're still methods because I may make a mistake and have some side effect inside of there. But for the most part, I try to write these static methods that take all of the inputs in and return values as opposed to accepting or using globals or having side effects and things like that. So it's definitely changed how I write code as well. So another thing that you've been talking on the French podcast, If This Then Dev, about Elm, and I don't speak French, so could you tell me a little bit? Have we covered some of the things that you talked about on that podcast, or are there any things that you talked about on there that you might be able to share with us in English? So
Yeah. Good question. Actually, we covered mainly the same things. This podcast was mainly my experience with Elm, how I entered this community, and what I was doing with it at work, and all the functional concepts behind. So I think we're pretty close. I won't say words to words, like exactly the same. But if you have any question on some parts, I can answer. But it was mainly the same, I would say, but in
okay,
French.
oui, yeah. That's great. Okay, well, is there anything else you want to add before we get to the picks?
No, maybe I will like to say hi to my colleagues at VP. I think they really recognize them, and Alex, Alexi, Cesar, and Jerome from my team, and all the others, of course, were doing great work in the company. And yeah, and Guillaume, my friend Guillaume, who give this right question.
Yeah.
That's
Thank you, Guillaume.
yeah, this is the mainly what's wanted to say.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Well, what picks do you have for us today?
So the first one, I will say the domain modeling made functional. the book from Scott Blashy. I really encourage you to read the book. And I also had the chance to attend the workshop of Scott. It's about domain-driven design. It talks about functional programming, but also how we can combine both. And it's on F sharp. But I really encourage you to go and check this out because it's very very nice material to be able to work with the stakeholders and the business.
Yeah, that's a great pick. I bought that as part of a Humble Bundle a couple months ago. And so I have the PDF and I have been reading that on and off. And I think, yeah, it's in F sharp, but Elm is somewhat influenced by F sharp. F sharp is an ML family language. And so a lot of the things that I've found in there, I think, translate really well into Elm as well. So, yeah, excellent pick. Do you have anything else for
Yeah.
us?
And more on the Elm part, I will say it's true that we talk a lot about MUI Explorer, but I will want to thank Richard Feldman for his great work on Elm CSS because it's what I recommend to use. It's kind of like CSS in JS, but it's Elm in CSS. And thanks to that, it's one building block of having a UI that is consistent and to be able to put it in the storybook. So I will recommend it, and also the material that he produces for front-end masters. All the courses on Elm are very interesting, and I encourage people interested by Elm to go and have a look.
Yeah, those are great picks. The front end masters courses for Elm by Richard Feldman, we give to our developers when they're starting out. And recently I had watched them. I had not watched those particular ones, but I had seen so much material by Richard before that, I thought, well, I have the gist. But the fact that it's all so concise and so put together into a single course makes it great. So, yeah, I recommend, even if you have lots of experience with Elm and you already think you know it all, maybe like I did, or assumed that I knew all the material that Richard had more clearly. But that really does put it together well. So thank you. And any other picks?
Maybe a last one. As
Okay.
I was saying, LMUI Explorer is not maintained anymore. But I would like to say that there is one initiative called Elm Book, which is seems to be a nice, very nice library to make showcase and documentation of UI. So I recommend it as the LMUI Explorer author. I recommend this tool.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when this George is that, I'm not sure exactly how to say his name. Georges Boris, his uh, Elm Book project, when it came out, I thought, hey, that reminds me of Elm UI Explorer. But yeah, it looks really good too, and I know that he's put a lot of work into supporting it, and I think is still continuing to support it today. So yeah, that's a great pick.
Yeah, for
All
sure.
right. And okay, so my picks are, the first one is Luca Mugnaini. Again, I'm not sure on the correct pronunciation there, so please let me know if I need to correct that. Has an Elm 2022 a year in review blog post on Dev2, and that I think is a great post because it showcases a lot of things that were happening in Elm in 2022, and and you can really kind of see all the great things that are going on in the Elm community. And then my last one, which is kind of related to what we've been talking about today, is Elm UI by Matthew Griffith. Again, kind of to the point of designing, creating a design system. I think that tool really helps with that. And so, yeah, that's really it. Thanks, Théophile, for coming to Elm Town. And until next time. Au
Thank you,
revoir.
Jared. Au revoir. Thank you, Jared.